tent guy here. I'm here with Scott Woodruff from Tent Ox. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
I'm Scott Woodruff from Tent Ox, and a little bit of history as I started in this business in 1987 as a typical Taylor rental, which was a franchise, and then that evolved into becoming a party and tent only operation. And toward the end of that career, probably half of that time, I was Event Central in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania.
So did you drop the Taylor Rental name at some point?
Yep. So with Taylor Rental, we were a franchise, which was equipment, construction equipment, homeowner equipment, and party. And as time went on, we migrated to being more involved with just tents, tables, and chairs, so that we discontinued that so we could focus on what we did the best at. It was about 75% of our business at that time.
Right, interesting. I just got a question this morning. Some guy asked if I ever thought about tools. And we were talking about that last night, and no, I have not. I don't want to do tools.
Well, having tools and party is like serving two masters.
Right, two different people. Yeah. And like I got jackhammers, but I don't want them to go out for a construction dude. You know, so. But anyways, we're not just here to talk about Tent Ox, we're here to talk about like safety too. So do you want to get into that first, or your main things? Like when you were in doing tents, what were the things that you were doing that could help the people who are watching? Because we got a lot of people who are watching that are just thinking of starting companies or just starting. I mean, there's some big companies watching, but a lot of you guys are smaller, like when I started out and when you started out. So what are the things you're seeing that they should know?
So the challenge when you first start out is that you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And you head out on the road, so to speak. You don't know what the rules and laws are for DOT for the trucks and drivers. You start to learn about regulations as it comes to tent permitting. So you have to be inquisitive in this business in order to understand what's expected of you, whether it's on a regional basis or on a DOT basis. And the idea is to ask a lot of questions. And when you talk about asking questions, not necessarily within the tent community, you can go to the people that you're renting trucks from, the people that are maintaining trucks, or peers in your market who are in other types of businesses, and they can be a great source of information. Then as you get on into tenting, which is my focus, most of the focus in my company over the years, then it starts to become understanding the industry we're in, understanding the technology of the tenting, and selecting the right tenting for the job. And if you select the right tenting for the job and you've been trained on how to put it up, or you're attentive to what the manufacturer is providing you for information so that you can install the tent correctly, you're probably on a good path. But I guess the thing I would say is, if you're not sure, you have to ask a lot of questions, and at that point it becomes the manufacturer's rep for the tent manufacturer that you're buying from. If they don't seem to be a good source of information, they're probably not the right vendor, because there are plenty of full-service tent manufacturers that they have the engineering, they have the training skills, they have the sales staff, and they have the willingness to stand behind their product in terms of the quality and guarantees that it performs the way it should in the early years of the purchase.
Right. And if you don't know who to ask questions to, you can just ask questions to me. If I don't know the answer, I'll find the answer. That's why I made this channel, to answer questions. But regarding like safety, like a lot of tent companies starting out, they spend a lot of money on the tents, and then they're going to skimp on the side poles and the ratchets and the stakes. You don't suggest doing that, right?
So I guess the ground floor for good tenting is anchoring it properly.
Right.
So the area where I see the newer companies, or companies that are moving into the tent business from the bounce ride business, the area where I see them probably have the greatest exposure is not understanding the degree of anchoring that a tent requires. And it
Right.
comes to do with the square footage of the tent and the manufacturer's recommendation. A frame tent would be tied down one way, a pole tent would be tied down a different way, but each one has its specifications. Then within that, let's say you're doing a 30 by 30 pole tent, then it's an issue of getting the stakes into the right depth, getting the correct distance away from the side poles. You know, we see people that aren't familiar with it that are trying to make the customer happy by short staking so that the stakes don't get in the way of the traffic. But in that process, they need to double up on their staking if they're going to have a safe tent, because they've compromised the ability to anchor. Whereas they go out to the proper length and do it to the full depth, they're going to have a better installation. And the same holds true for as you get into frames and ballasting. You know, there's an easy way to get into ballasting when a customer pushes you to provide a tent without staking, which is to work toward water barrels, because it's a low cost of entry. But the water barrels still have to be the amount of pounds of ballast that you need to perform the task, and then you have to over ballast to compensate for the sliding nature of the barrels. And as such, over the last 10 years, you've seen the industry pretty much get away from water barrels unless they're doing things like 10 by 10s or 15 by 15s. And the issue is that concrete with its non-slip characteristics and more density allows you to get a more proper anchoring per square foot of tenting.
Right. So the main problem with water barrels is you could have two guys push it across concrete to where it needs to go. So if you don't have enough water barrels on a tent and wind hits it, you can just imagine that those water barrels are going to slide. Also, I can push a water barrel over by myself. So if the tent moves a little and you're not ratcheted right or it's too far away, that water barrel is just going to tip over. They're heavy in one direction, up and down, but not that way, and they slide. And
they're top heavy, so if your tent's starting to move, it's actually just tipping it over. It's more of a lever type action to get it to tip over.
Right.
And that's usually where the first part of the failure is that they'll put the water barrels out on a 15 by 15. They'll put the water barrels out on the 15 by 15 on that side, so they're both out. The wind comes along and it pushes it. Well, this one starts dragging, that one ends up loose, and then the tent starts collapsing, and it's like a domino effect. And in fact, the water barrels, if you're going to use them, should be straight up and down at the leg, and you should put something in between the barrel and the ground in order to increase the friction so you don't have the sliding effect, and it'll stay with the leg. So you actually strap it to the leg if you're going to do it the most effectively.
Right. A lot of people, like you said, think it's a low cost entry. But I will tell you that it costs you more in the long run, because when you show up to someone's house and you got to fill up water barrels with a hose, and each water barrel takes half an hour to fill up, and you got to do 6 of them, say, you're gonna be sitting there for a long time. Whereas if you just had some concrete, and sure, it's a big investment to get the concrete and the block and roll cart, but over time, you're spending minutes on getting that off the truck and where it needs to go instead of half hour per water barrel, and then you can just move on to the next job. So you can fit more jobs in the same day, not having to wait for all your water barrels to be filled. So if safety is not important to you right now, I'm sure money is. So that's something to think about.
Yep. I think the other thing that I see from time to time is the newer companies not sensing where employee safety comes into play, and then that comes into play when we're doing installations or takedowns. We've got a weather pattern coming in. You know, the customer demands a tight time frame and you have to meet it, but when you're out at a job site at 3 in the afternoon and a thunderstorm comes through in May and you're hearing lightning and then one clap is 5 seconds away, it means it's within a mile of you. You know there's imminent problems because of the weather. You have no business trying to raise a tent. If that tent is just a frame, it's fine. If the tent's up and anchored, it's fine. But anything in between that, you're at risk in that. And it's not just the risk of the winds and the rain. It's also the risk of having the lightning impact. I mean, the number of people that have been struck by lightning in the nation every year having to do with tents is amazing. Now, it's not during installations. People tend to take shelter under tents when it should be the opposite for storms. They're holding on to the tent, and then it's acting like a lightning rod, and there's a safety issue there. But the whole idea is don't try to install a tent during conditions where it doesn't make sense to. And that kind of then requires you to think in terms of keeping yourself a window where if your installation has to be done by 6 o'clock at night, maybe it's the day before, maybe it's the morning before, maybe it's the last minute because the storm got through and now you can do it at the last minute, but you can't be doing it when there's a risk.
Right, and just open the back of your truck or sit in your truck and just bullshit with your employees and just wait it out.
I mean, I can remember we were down in York, Pennsylvania. We had a setup, it was a shopping center, it's a 20 by 40. We needed to have it up for the event in the morning, and we're there Friday afternoon, and it's 3 o'clock. We're looking at the weather pattern, and it was supposed to be something that came and went, and it didn't. It got worse and worse, and then it looked like it was going to continue. We wrapped it up, we left, we just left the frame in place, and we were back there at 5 in the morning so that we could be ready when they were ready at 7 o'clock, because that's just what you do in this business.
Right, there's no putting it off for a few days because the party's going to happen. You got to do it, which gets kind of tiresome after 15 years, but parties happen when they happen and you have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But so you are obviously in the tent ox because you know it is really efficient and safer to do a lot of things. But before you got the tent ox, what sort of things were you doing in your company to be more efficient? Because obviously I feel like you understand efficiency really helps the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
So like what sort of things were you doing before the tent ox came into existence?
Well, just to give you a sense, my background before the tent business was being in the air cargo business, and our job was to move large amounts of freight between airport cities, and the whole process of doing that was airplanes which had segment loading and pallets of freight, and the idea was to build the freight pallets, strap it down, and get it loaded in a plane. We could load 40,000 pounds of freight, which was 5 pallets, in about 20 minutes. So the plane would arrive, we'd get it on, it would go, but the time it took to prep that was all about logistics and material handling. I see the tent business and the party rental business, tables, chairs, stage, dance floor, flooring, I see it as a material handling challenge. And all you're really trying to do is look at it no matter what size you are and say, how can I use the least amount of energy to get the product from the point where it's stored in the warehouse to the point that it's up. And that becomes a process of using two-wheelers for dollies so you can move things around, developing carts for transportation. Then as it evolves, you may get into some type of, using pallet jacks on commercial sites where you've got blacktop and these Mongo movers for moving stacks of 50 to 60 chairs. It all becomes a process of evolution where as you get larger, there's ways to move things more efficiently. And some of it's just developing skills. You got guys that run 60-inch tables that they're literally able to wheel 4 at a time. I never could do it, but I'm amazed when I go into some of these big companies where they're coming out of the warehouse and they're just literally rolling 4 at a time. They get in the truck and they go back and they're back and forth, and these are the big operations. They find ways to just reduce the number of trips back and forth.
Right.
And so it is with tent installation where, at some point in time it makes sense to get into a Rhino or Atlas Copco for driving stakes. You get into the mechanical pullers at first, and then suddenly you're looking at the need for stake pullers that are hydraulic, and there's a couple different great options out there for that. And this is long before you even get to the point where Tenox is on the horizon, because that's what it is stepping into automation at the level you're at.
Right. And that's what I learned in the very beginning. I could make more money by buying more things and working longer hours, or I could just make more profit by figuring out how to handle things faster and just get things done faster, which is the route I decided to take, and was actually the first few videos I made was all about just showing you the efficiency things, which a lot of people don't want to spend money on, because a jack jaw is $450. And you're like, I could just buy some chairs and make money. But you could just buy that and save some time and make not more money, but have more money for yourself. And like an American Granite, or what's the name of that company? Granite Industries makes the American carts.
Yeah. Yeah.
That cart is $450, $500, and you need 2 of them for most job sites, and it's hard to justify that investment. But I took it from the very beginning that if I have that stuff, it's going to make life easier. I can get more jobs done in the same day and save time, which saves money.
Yeah.
But if you can get more jobs done in the same day, if I can get 2 more jobs done, as opposed to some companies just moving everything by hand, I'm making more money as well and saving time and money.
It's funny when you're at the size that a lot of these companies are that I know follow you and comment on your operation. There's so many different conditions everybody's faced with. One company might be working out of a garage type situation where there's no loading dock, so they tend to lend toward using ramps and getting everything 2-wheel to ramp up. And another company in the same situation may be more committed to lift gates because that's their style, and another company might get into, they'll have loading docks and they'll approach it even differently yet. And the other thing, it depends on your market, because what you're delivering to in your market, if you're in a big city, is quite different than what you're delivering to if you're in a rural area like you are here.
Right.
And so you have to tailor your automation to your demographics and your situation that's unique to you. And the idea is just to be creative and constantly be evaluating options for the sake of it. If you're not analytical, you're probably not going to be very creative. Then the best thing to do is to go out and visit other companies and get ideas just by seeing their operations, because there's a lot to be learned. Right. Tremendous value.
Yeah, and there's Facebook groups, and me and most people that you call who are not your competitors, most cases will help you out. Like a lot of times people on the Facebook groups say, show me your warehouse, and then 10 people take pictures of the warehouse so they can see how to get ideas. That's how I got the ideas to store my poles, was by seeing other ways people were doing it. And there's a big debate about truck versus trailer, like a box truck with a lift gate versus a truck and a trailer. And everyone thinks theirs is better, but it's really, like you said, depending on your warehouse, depending on your market, right? Do you have a preference?
Well, I have a preference based on being a bigger company,
right,
where we were doing 2 and 3, 24, 26 footers on a job. So we were forced to get into whatever would cause us to make the least number of trips. But when you're in the earlier years of the business, or you're in a market where it's smaller events, weddings are smaller, then it's really a matter of, do I want to be in 15-footer? Maybe if I've got 3 trucks, maybe my third truck might be a 24-footer, or do I get into some of these large trailers? But the trailers have their complications too, because if you have a trailer in it and it's got a gross vehicle carrying weight of 10,000, then you're under CDL. But as soon as you get into a trailer that has 14,000 pound axles, you're now into CDL. It's not so easy to find CDL drivers to deal with this industry, so you have to kind of choke it down to what's more manageable in the earlier years. The entry level labor that we need or get because we're seasonal, you kind of have to speak to that, and that's going to be trucks that are under 26,000 GVW, or if you get into trailers, it's going to be a pickup truck and a trailer that's sized to that, so you're not going over that CDL limit.
Right. And I found, I may be wrong, but with trucks and trailers, there's a lot of gas being used as opposed to if you just take a 26-footer out. There's a local company that only uses trucks and trailers, and they have to take multiple trips because of loading, and you have to load it right. You can't have it unbalanced, and it just takes a lot of gas to tow that much weight. Whereas you take a 26-footer, it just not using as much gas.
Yeah. So now somebody else might make the argument the other way and say, okay, but I have 2 pickup trucks and I have 7 trailers, and a couple of those trailers stay loaded, preloaded. I don't have to handle them as much because the cost of registering 2 trucks, and trailers have almost no cost of registering, and their insurance cost is relatively low. Now your overall fleet cost per year may be lower because you're using less trucks, more trailers, and using them that way in a local market. Whereas if you had the same capacity to deliver with 15 and 24 footers, you might have 4 trucks to do the same thing.
Right.
So, there's different ways to look at it, but the distance you go is certainly a big variable too, because fuel becomes really leveraging you when you're going out, more than an hour away.
Right.
So
the point is, let's stop arguing about trucks versus trailers, because it just depends on your company. But so let's start getting into the 10X. Like, how did you get into the 10X?
So the 10X was just a continuation of the process where I was trying to figure out how to do material handling and installations more efficiently. In my business, we had 27% of our business was university work, so it's more corporate university oriented for our company at the age it was. At that point we were about 25 years into it. And the whole idea was to find a way to automate the movement of chairs. We'd have these big deliveries of chairs that were 5,000 and 8,000 chairs at a time. We were palletizing them. We were moving them in by hand in the early years. We were moving them in with mongos in the later years, and then eventually the 10X came into play because we could go across the turf onto the sports field, and the university would approve that. Well, as soon as you get the machine in there for that, then you're also going to bring in the stage and the stage cover for that graduation, and that's going across the grass. All those things we used to carry in by hand. It was hugely labor intensive, and you get that synergy going all the way through the business. Now, if you're just doing more wedding business and you're into smaller tents, then you don't have as much potential gain with the machine to pay for itself in terms of the hours it's used, but it's still productive. But then in the more recent years, the 10X, we came out with the smaller machine, and that kind of filled that gap a little bit, because the people who are doing 30, 40 wide pole tents, maybe occasional 60 wide, they could get into a price point that started to make sense with the 200 series, which just wasn't available a couple of years ago.
Right. But last night you were saying different reasons why people would get into the 10X, because the 10X is a big investment, but you want to just go over those various reasons, because it's not just one size fits all. It was various reasons.
So if you look at the generic look at it, it's what is it that makes the 10X pay for itself? Well, first of all, you shouldn't buy it unless it does pay for itself. It's got to cause the company to increase their profit over the long term. Now, the quicker you want a return on it, then the larger you need to be. But if let's say you're a company where you're an owner and you're in your 50s and you still go out on all the jobs, the 10X might be for you, because you can now go out on jobs, whereas as you age out, you can't do some of the physical work. The machine's starting to do a lot of that stuff. But if you look at the reasons why the 10X pays for itself, it's a couple things. It was several things. First is the time it takes to move tables and chairs that aren't palletized is X number of man hours. When you move that onto a pallet and move it around, it's less, and that means you have less people on the job. There's less time on the job. Same holds true for moving tent tops, moving racks of stakes, a whole host of things. So it's a labor savings. When you get into stake driving, the 10X in grass is going to put about 6 stakes a minute in. If you're using an Atlas Copco, you're going to be at about 2 stakes a minute. If you're using a Rhino, probably a little bit less, though it's easier for everybody to operate. But then there's that, in addition to the productivity issue, there's the fatigue factor that goes along, particularly if you're using an Atlas Copco and you're putting in 100, 150 stakes on a 60 wide. It just depends on what your market is, what makes sense. There's a workman's comp issue, because with these gas drivers, the potential for it to jump off the stake and strike somebody is there, and that's been a problem. The other thing we find is that if you've got your core crew that goes through the winter, and maybe 2 or 3 guys, owning the machine starts to give them more reason to enjoy the job, and they're more likely to stay with it than if everything's all handwork. And they're, typically in this business, when somebody's been in it for 5 to 10 years, they're in their 30s, they'll usually age out. And it's not that they don't like the work, it's that they can go find the same kind of work for the same kind of money. Find good work for the same kind of money, but not have to work as hard. And they're going to know they're going to be home at 5 o'clock every night, which is something you're just not going to have in this business.
So yeah, if you're putting up a 60 wide wedding and you're there all day, the next day you still have to come in and you're going to be tired, and then that's just going to go down the line for the week. You're just going to get more and more tired.
Right.
So the tent ox allows you to get out at a good time, still get the same amount of work done, and your guys come back not tired. That's one of the main things that I heard about it. So like a company that's doing a lot of frame tents in a city and they got to move lots of blocks around, maybe they don't do lots of tables and chairs. Maybe they just, like I know a few companies in New York City who just basically do tents and have to secure them with concrete. So that's like they might get into it just for the moving the concrete.
Right. So we see people where concrete is a driver. We see people where flooring and stage is a driver, and we see people where the tenting is the driver, particularly if they're into pole tents. And if they have the combination of 2 or 3 of those, then their return is faster.
Right.
That's really what it comes down to.
Now, something interesting, because we're not just talking, this channel is mainly tents, but a lot of people are watching from other businesses. This is called a tent ox, but the main unit has different attachments for different industries, right? So what are some of those? I didn't know this until I was doing the website and seeing it being marketed for other industries.
So if you look at the machine itself, it's basically like a hydraulic power plant on wheels. And so it's going to, in the region we are here, we just got a few inches of snow overnight. It's going to operate a snow blower very effectively. It's going to operate a bucket for clearing snow. You could put a blade on it for doing snow, but you could also use it for landscaping. You could use it for putting mulch down. And in other industries, they use it for demolition. They use it for trenching. There's a whole host of different attachments it's capable of. We're just one of the many segments in that this machine is used for.
Right. Yeah, there's a whole ton of attachments that you can get for this thing, not just tent related. But with that being said, the tent related stuff, what are the attachments that?
So the primary attachments that we started off with were the stake driver, stake puller, and center pole push, and of course the forklifting capabilities. As time has gone on, we've gone to variations of the center pole push. We've gone to a roof panel puller for pulling the Keter track, roof panels on 40, 50 and structures. And the most recent addition we had this year was the Oxhorn, which is a carpet pole. And the idea behind that with some of these large companies is they'll put down a 60, 80, 100 wide or a structure, and then they're going to carpet the whole thing. With this, you can throw the carpet up on the top of the truck, on top of the tables and chairs. You can pull it off with a machine. You can go over to where it's going to be opened up, and you just let it literally stay on the bar, and the 2 guys pull it off while it's unraveling.
Right.
Now the big question is, okay, am I going to come up with a way to do some way to roll them up, which is a bigger challenge, I have to say. So.
Right. And then you also made a thing to carry stakes.
Yep. So there's a stake rack we sell. It's a modular stake rack because a lot of people are using barrels or they're hand loading the stakes. And while the Tenox is intended to automate, it's the dovetailing of the Tenox with material handling rack systems, dunnage carts, that allows them to move more materials. This particular stake rack, it holds 75 stakes, so it's sized well to all of our machines. And if you have a larger machine, you're going to get multiples of it. But that same stake rack, if you don't own a machine, can be put on with a pallet jack in the back of the truck. It's the last thing on, it's the first thing off, and it just creates a compartment where the stakes always sit there. As dirty as they get, you're consolidating, controlling it there instead of them rolling across the floor.
And the interesting thing, I don't know if you ever tried to put stakes flat, because of the heads, one side starts angling up and they would start sliding. So you have what would you call it? A thing to stop that.
It's an extension where all the dirty part of the stake goes. If the stake rack is here, the extension's here, the stakes load this way, so they're going up against that. So they're all picked up from this end. So this end's clean, this end's dirty, and the idea is just to keep it as neat. Then the other thing about it is when it's filled properly and all the stakes are fairly square, it's going to be 75 to 80 stakes, If it's a sloppy job, which, you get these part-timers in and you never know what they're going to do, and they're crisscross and some of the points are out, now you're going to maybe be 70, 75 steaks. But to the extent that we're not going to be able to count steaks in this industry easily in certain situations, you can look and say, I need 150 steaks. I'll take a couple racks and a handful more.
Right. So this year, I'm actually going to buy a few of those for one truck to test it out, because we use barrels. So if you need a steak, you either need to climb up the truck or lift gate up to get the steak out of the barrel. I want to have them sideways in the same spot my barrels would be in, and that way we can just walk over the truck and pull it off.
Yep.
And same thing, put it on the truck, and not have to, we're on the ground throwing it up in the air, hoping it gets down in. But so yeah, I'm going to test that out on one of the trucks this year, two of them. So a main feature of the 10-ox is the articulating body, right? So I've seen someone drop steaks in a yard, and they had a regular forklift and they had a 10-ox. The forklift went in, ripped it up. The 10-ox went in, dropped it next to it, pulled out, and you couldn't see anything. So that's where the articulating body comes in.
So you have a combination of the light weight to lift ratio. The machine's designed to be light by its nature. It has an articulated turning with a flotation turf tire, and the combination of that allows it to always roll through all its turns, as opposed to skidding or, when you say forklift, I think about skid steers, which is what we replace a lot of times, but forklifts, really, their trouble as soon as they're off the blacktop. So this is a much lighter footprint in either case, whether it's a skid steer or forklift, and allows you to get in and out places, because the tire is pretty much conforming to the ground. Now the exception to that would be if you have standing water. If you see standing water and you drive over it, it's essentially a slurry under there, and anything that you do, including walking over the feet, you're going to see a muddy silt coming up just from your feet walking through. Then that's a case where the machine could displace some of that if it's that loose, if you will.
Right, but in general, on a nice day, it's keeping the yard nicer, because you're showing up a few days before a big event, and they a lot of times don't have time to have landscapers come in and fix everything, nor do they want to. You're supposed to come in, do your job, and leave, and no one's supposed to see the destruction if you're not doing it right. So the 10-ox comes in, keeps the yard or golf course or whatever looking good, and then you leave, and everyone just sees the good event. No one sees that you ran over some stuff over here with a forklift or skid steer or something.
And even if you have standing water, you throw a sheet of plywood down, let's say it's a transition area from where the road and the truck is to where the tent's going to be. You go over plywood, you're not going to invade that turf area with any problem. So there's a way to bridge the gap with that when you need to.
Right. I know a lot of you are not at that point yet for a 10-ox, but he understands, we were talking about it last night, that you may not be at the point yet, but eventually you will be. So he won't be like not wanting to talk to you because you're small. He knows that one day you might be at that point, or you might know some people who are at that point. So he's very nice.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I had dinner with him last night, and I didn't realize that one of my customers first heard about the 10-ox through Adam. I didn't realize that. So in my way of thinking, my goal is to educate people on what safer ways to do the industry and how the 10-ox might help them. But like a tent washer, it's not for everybody, and there's a right time for it. But just educating you on what it is, maybe at some point in time you'll be introducing it to somebody else that I've never reached out to. So that's all good. I mean, the educating people on how to run this business better, I enjoy doing that as much as Adam does. I just do it in a different way.
Right. If you want to see the 10-ox, you'll be at the ARA show, right?
We will be at the ARA show this year in Orlando, and we also always do the Matra show. Matra show is a full setup. We go in with 5 machines this year coming up. It'll be up in Connecticut, and it's a chance to be hands-on. But if you're interested in learning more about the machine, if you call us, we'll usually direct you to videos that help you to visualize how it would work in your application. And quite frankly, there's probably somebody who's not your direct competitor that I could connect you up with if you wanted to go out and see it on a job. I've arranged that more than once.
Right, and I've seen it on the job a lot because my friend has, I think, 5 of them at this point.
4.
4 of them, and I've seen it a lot. I haven't driven it, but I've seen it save a lot of time and a lot of. He uses it to lift frame tents too. All right, so that was Scott Woodruff with Tent Ox. I'll put a link in the description for the website and contact. All right, thank you very much for coming in, and hopefully some people will see you at the show. If you see him, just let him know that you know me. If you don't really know me, but just let him know you've seen the video. Thanks for watching.